What's up, everybody? It's Casey, the Game Pt, and we are back here again with the Rise of the Mechromancer, Part 5. I'm almost out of fingers for that. Last we left off, our party had remained split, with Sylvie and Callum now missing. The main part of the party, sans Snow, as they were still in the meeting from the last session, as far as the timeline is concerned, began to track down a clue they were given by the secretary. They were told that a mass amount of rack rods would arrive at a warehouse in the slums in batches and stay there all night before leaving. This warehouse also seems to be a hotbed of cultist activity. As the group approached, they found a place to stake out the warehouse and began to see groups of the rack rods rolling in. They arrived in groups of a dozen or so before the warehouse doors slid closed and a magical gleam appeared around the edges. They came up with a plan to have Gideon change into his hobgoblin form and use his artificer knowledge to gain entrance as a mechanic. He then used his cap of disguise, began to schmooze the guard, telling him that he was an Izzet guild member and would be interested in working on these engines. After a successful persuasion check, he gained entrance and found that the entire warehouse served as a portal to a racetrack for late-night gambling. He was thrown into a pit and made a few checks to successfully repair a rack rod mid-race in impressive time, granting him clout amongst the other crew. As the race was winding down, Gideon noticed a portal appear near the edge of the racetrack. A successful perception check saw that two cultists smuggling several people out of the area in shackles and rags, before being ushered outside and told they would be in contact. While Gideon was doing a last bit of recon on the engines of the rack rods with somebody outside, the party noticed the cultists leaving out the side of the warehouse towards a different one. For the record, this was part of the session beforehand, being 2 weeks ago, but because of timeline purposes, I put it here so that I wasn't going backwards, forwards 4 hours ago meanwhile. As the party began another stakeout, they were greeted by Snow, who had dashed from rooftop to rooftop, dodging explosions all the way to make it across the city in record time. Once the entirety of the present party had reconvened, they then started casting a myriad of spells and making checks to discern that there was a Mordenkainen's faithful hound placed by the door that the two cultists had entered earlier. They also noticed a camera swiveling above before Gideon moved to close on the hound, and it triggered its warning barks. This also caused Ale to use his mage hand to turn the camera away from the entrance. However, it was too late as the bay doors slid open and a cadaver collector walked out, and the party rolled initiative. A fierce back and forth between the collector using its husks and converted projectiles before they would rise up on the ground and begin fighting themselves. Specters were also summoned by the collector to try and even the field, but they were quickly turned by channel divinity. Eventually the party prevailed, but battered and bruised, they pressed into the warehouse where they found racks of people on spikes being converted. This was a meat locker turned cooling bay, and at the back was a massive power source feeding the whole building. Ale began to cut the cables running to the shelves while the rest of the group began investigating the power source. And that is where we ended our session. Now you're all up to date. Sorry again for the 2 weeks ago thing being here, but again, I didn't want to be going 4 hours ago, meanwhile, 2 hours ago, meanwhile, everybody's mixed up, blah, blah, blah. Either way, I'm Casey, the Game Pt, and at the end of the day, I'll always be here. Bye-bye, everybody.